Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the National Soil Moisture Workshop. We're going to go ahead and get started close to on time today, and our audio appears to be working. Yay. So welcome back to day 2. Yesterday, we had a really nice overview of kind of the broad applications and why soil moisture matters in natural hazards, and then moved a little bit into some of the more specific agricultural applications. This morning, we're going to be starting out with a theme of forests and fire. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first keynote speaker. I don't think there's any other housekeeping business this morning. So when we wanted to have this workshop, we were thinking about what are some of the issues specific to North Carolina and specific to Asheville. And so there's this, as we learned a little bit about yesterday, issue of compounding hazards, where you have things like a torrential rainstorm and you have flooding and then you have downed trees, and then the consequences, then you might have higher fire risk because you have this fuel loading that's happened on the ground if it doesn't continue to be equally wet, or you risk of landslides, things like that. And so in this highly forested area, we thought forest and fire were an appropriate theme to focus on for at least one of our keynote talks. Our keynote speaker this morning is Michael Ward. He is a retired U.S. Forest Service worker who most recently was the North Carolina Fire Manager at Nature Conservancy. He has over 30 years of experience in conservation, restoration, and naturalist guide work. He is a passionate outdoorsman and has worked to protect natural landscapes in on-the-ground conditions, both conducting controlled burns and fighting wildfires, as well as working in planning and leadership positions. Mike has a bachelor's degree in natural resources and conservation ecology from University of Florida and agricultural and life sciences. He has worked for the U.S. Forest Service, the National Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and is a vehicle mechanic for the U.S. Army. So he's had a lot of different ways on the ground of thinking about soil and water and fire and all of those interesting questions. Today, he will be talking to us about using soil moisture to support wildland fire and habitat restoration. In the wildland fire business, soil moisture information is used to inform critical decisions regarding indicators of fire dangers such as fuel drying, combustion potential of duff and organic soils, and more. Soil moisture can also help to inform land management and restoration decisions and support critical choices in the challenging space of wildland fire management, prediction, and response. So please join me in welcoming Mike Ward up to the podium as I get those slides up.
All right, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Yep, sounds like the speakers are working. Thanks for inviting me to this. I've like Elise said, I've been in wildland fire for probably about 40 years, associated with it in all kind of different contexts, and getting into fire environment and fire danger ratings and things like that over the last probably couple decades. So appreciate you having me. I focused the discussion this morning more on just like general operational fire management decision making and how soil moistures affect that daily and kind of seasonal aspect of that. So we lost it. Okay.
I don't know where it went, but.
So to just keep talking about that, it was really nice hearing yesterday and looking through the presentations that are coming today on the agenda, how a lot of the work that all y'all are doing. First off, thank you all for doing what you do. And the work that's been happening around evaluating soil moisture and incorporating it into and trying to deliver it to the folks on the ground who need it the most to implement the work they're doing, from farmers to firefighters to everybody else that's out there, emergency management specialists. So, all right. So did that work? Nope.
Are you doing left and right?
I am doing left and right. It's going to beat.
Okay.
Okay. But I can't see them, but that's okay. No. I'll muddle through this thing. I haven't given a presentation in a while like this either. Usually I'm instructing NWCG courses and they're pretty cut and dry already. So, hopefully I'm going to probably run over a lot of information and perspective that you all already have, but hopefully I can add some to it from a North Carolina aspect, or at least the Southeast United States fire fire management perspectives. So, as a lot of y'all know, and you understand the relationship there between the fuels out there, which is everything that can burn, and that soil moisture component, how that influences the the stress on the live fuels out there, which are all the plants. Everything's available when it's dry enough. So from the canopies down to the roots, and that's where we as fire managers have a lot of concern with where the vegetation is and where the fuels are, including the organic soil layer. So uh, duff moisture, when I was a brand new firefighter back in 92, with the feds, federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it was pounded into us that duff moisture, if it's below 100%, we're going to have ground fire. And that was in Panhandle of Florida. That's not a standard measurement from anywhere, but that's what my boss said, and I believed it. But he was a big believer in cooking the fuels and going and getting observed fuel moistures from where we're going to be working that day or in general out there in the field. That's not a common practice, and that's a common thread through a lot of what I want to discuss with you too, is that we don't have a lot of common applications that we use for wildland fire daily observations. We use a lot of the products that you guys make and deliver every day for different levels, but at the ground level, there's really no standardization. And looking even at our fire weather forecasts, there's not really discussion on, there will be a little bit in discussion for drought, but we don't have indicators in there. We used to have Palmer and Haynes index. That's kind of gone away too in a lot of the forecasts. Maybe some vapor pressure deficit information or things like that might be coming in our forecast, but that standardized sampling and understanding where we're at really, I think, ties into where we've talked about the network of actual in situ soil moisture sampling networks out there and the gaps that we have out there. Where we have those, I think it's really helpful for us, like the Oklahoma Mesonet network and the Alabama network. And I think New York also has incorporated a lot of soil moisture monitoring in their networks that people can, not just fire practitioners, but everybody can access. So understanding where we're at on a daily is really important for fire managers and where we're going to be next week, what the trends are for fire danger. I go backwards. All right. Am I going forwards? Okay, I'm going forward now. So how those fuel moistures and where those fuels are really and how the soil moisture is affecting those fuels really relates to fire intensity and rates of spread for fire operational decision making. But some of the indicators that we derive from fuel moistures are rates of spread, ignition component, spread component, energy release components, things like that. And all of that is derived basically from the fuel moisture scenario that we're under at the time and the forecast weather conditions that we're looking at. Yeah, geez, I can't read those. I didn't make very good notes. So yeah, see if you can make that, because I was just going to go from the slides and then kind of ad lib.
There.
Oh, there you go. That's perfect.
I think
Thank
that's as
you.
big as I can make
Yeah.
it.
Thanks, y'all. So one of the thinking about large fire growth and how the availability of the canopy fuels or the ladder fuels getting up into the canopy of a forested area is all about the moisture content and the stress level on the tree canopy itself, and how much moisture it's able to hold on to, and how much moisture the atmosphere is pulling from those plants. So once those canopies become involved, about 60% live fuel moisture or less, you can count on a single tree or group tree or crown involvement in a wildfire scenario. So measuring and being able to determine where those canopy fuels are. I think there's a lot of products that y'all are making right now that we can utilize, but aren't commonly considered in that transitional fuel from ground fire to canopy involvement. And so I guess where I'm trying to get to with that is the drier the trees are, the more available they are, the more ignition component we're going to have on the ground fuels that are in front of that can catch the ember production from those canopy fuels. And so spotting potential, we call that spotting in wildland fire, is really increased dramatically as the fuels dry and the canopies dry. So even from shrub component fuels like sagebrush or in the precosins, we have the canopy might only be 20 foot tall, but the more available it is to burn, the more ember production it's going to produce. And then you get into wind and distance and lofting, how long that ember can stay productive. And then when it hits the ground, will it start a new spot fire? Will it start a new fire? So ember production is really important, and determining how much of the canopy fuels are available and how far those embers are going to fall and be available when they hit the ground is also really important to us. So some other considerations for soil moisture with fire spread also is we use a lot of natural barriers and natural breaks, or we count on those throughout different seasonality, especially when we're prescribed burning to do hazard fuel reduction or habitat restoration and all of that. And when are those natural breaks, say ephemeral creeks, ephemeral streams and ponds, things like that, or even just vegetational transitions into more height from like mesic to hydric vegetation types. We count on those, but how long are those going to be available? And where there's a heavy duff component, especially in the surface layer, so that and I'm thinking about is it the O or the A? It's the A. The O, right? Yeah. Okay. So the O horizon. Thanks. That's where we're really, or I really like to focus on, because that's where we can get a lot of trouble in there as far as long-term smoldering, resistance to containment to fire, increased fire intensity, really increased smoke production for long term. So things like that, and all that ties into, I think, accurate and timely and soil moisture analysis, or at least monitoring out there of some sort. The sport products are representing pretty well for a lot of our applications out there, but still capturing that availability of those surface fuels, which I consider that O horizon to be a surface fuel. It's just usually not available. When it is, you can extrapolate that as far as fire potential and spread, I think, into your fire danger for the day, and what you can expect as far as resistance to containment. It's a very and it's very costly also to suppress fires that get down into that level. So trying to monitor those and keep up with it. But what I've seen out there and what I've run into is that we don't really have a good network of data that we can look at to see where that level of the forest floor is, where we have organic soils and where they're at. So, and if there is that data available, getting it to the people who are going to be needing it in a consistent package. So, and then, okay, I mentioned that when we can get the inverse too. When things are too wet out there, it really will impede some of our operational capacity in doing suppression operations. When we have moist soils but dry surface fuels, it limits some of our ability for mechanical, heavy equipment and things like that, for soil disturbance. And that a lot of times decreases our capacity to suppress a fire, and we have to go to a different strategy for that. So sometimes that impedes us. And then one of the last things specific to here, as far as rates of spread and intensity and organic soil moisture, is one of the tactics we use is using leaf blowers and big industrial blowers and things like that to blow the leaf litter off the forest floor. This is like the number one go-to for suppression fires in the mountains here. Might be different, it's not a national consideration sometimes, but it really works well here in the mountains with the broadleaf litter and even a lot of the pine litter with some of the new blowers. But being able to remove that litter, retain the first O horizon of the duff that's on the forest floor. It might be 1 inch, might be 6 inches, but leaving that there and being able, it is a very effective fire break until it's not. And that's where we run into a lot of problems. We did it again this year, especially in the shoulder seasons. And that's some of the analysis and some of the things we try to glean out of the products y'all are making is where are we now? Because sometimes if you're in January, February, you can blow in a leaf line, put a blower line in, it'll be good for 2 or 3 weeks. You'd come back and try to do that in March and April, it's good for 2 or 3 hours. So when and where it is, well, we look at it, we pick it up, we smell it, we squeeze. Okay, yeah, it feels like it's got some moisture in it. That's where we're at as far as on the site, being able to tell exactly where we are for making our fire management decisions that day. So I don't know, that's and that's a consistent problem. We don't have standardized equipment that can help us dial that in. That's quick. There's been a lot of products that have been tried out to limited, varying levels of success out there. But I think it's a really important thing. It just like I was saying this year, it really the rain shut off early, and we got this super high temperatures early in this right in the middle kind of our typical prescribed burning season, and a lot of those burns turned into wildfires because of that. Those lines not holding, not cutting down the mineral soil. When we do cut the mineral soil for a fire break, we run into erosion issues and things like that too. So yeah, monitoring that, being able to measure that duff moisture on site would be a great tool, great ability for us to dial in what we got. Seen that. So I was talking about that resistance to containment. Obviously, the deeper the duff and the drier it is, if it's available, the harder it is to be able to put out. Luckily, nowadays we have some better tools as far as IR capability to identify some of those underground fires that are still going on. Even after we get 2 or 3 inches of rain, sometimes the ground will still be on fire underneath there. If we're not, I also think that if we can monitor that moisture profile in the soil and how it's relating to that over horizon and that the fire that's underground will really help fire practitioners and operational folks understand how long the potential is going to be, especially when we start transitioning back into a wetter cycle. but those deeper organic soils are still available and still burning. Like out on the coast, I've seen fires burn underneath roads. And 4 months later, after everybody's gone home. Okay, fire's out. We're good. No, you're not. It's still burning because of some of the road construction techniques and things they used out there. And just the precautions and swamps, bays, whatever you want to call them, Carolina bays, those organic soil profiles. I worked at Okefenokee for a number of years. It's a large swamp in the southeast corner of Georgia. Um, there's peat that's 40 foot deep there. They used to mine it. There was a very productive peat mining operation there. So the lower the water gets there, it would burn for 100 years probably if it didn't rain again. So because there's enough fuel there to do it. So that's some of the challenges that we have is where, when's it going to be available and how deep is it going to go? Once it gets, say we get a duff fire, and here's another real problem we have with that organic soil burning is once it burns down through a duff layer to the soil, we got hydrophobic soils then. It totally changes a lot of the, and y'all probably understand a lot of that, the microbial associations and microbial fungal associations in the root layer because of that heat and intensity and the change in the moisture regime for that area because of the penetration or the ability of moisture to work through the soil. And for foresters, ecologists, fire ecologists, things like that, trying to restore and rehab areas that burned in places like that, it compounds the amount of effort we're going to put in there, and it really reduces the response rate of the vegetation that we can put in. And so, are you tracking my time? Okay, thank you. All right, good, because I can ramble like a long time. Um, oh, cool, perfect. So so I don't know. I'm going to keep beating on the duff horse, but it's been a make it or break it a lot for me through my career, and not just in the southeast too. Almost everywhere I've been on fires, which is almost every state in the country, in Canada, and a little bit in Mexico, but North America, let's just say, never made it to Maine yet because it's got a 200-year burn, rotation. It ain't made it yet. So one of these years. Anyway, that's always been a consistent problem, and Maine's going to have that problem too. New Jersey has a huge problem with it. Places where we've had that natural fire return interval interrupted because of our disturbances and our policies for fire suppression and protection of infrastructure and things like that. A lot of systems are out of whack now. So when you do get a fire, you're going to have that huge organic soil layer, and even initial entry burning to restore these habitats you can't go back and restore them just with one burn and you're good to get back on cycle because you've got 150 years of built up organic soil that's not really supposed to be there. And a lot of times the forest canopy and the forest composition has changed because of that. And a lot of mesification has happened. And unfortunately, that's another thing with some of those hydrophobic soils and some of those changes that happen when we have organic soil fire is that the more mesophytic tree species favor that type of soil change as far as the microbial associations that are in there. And so that's a double whammy for us, trying to restore, say, white oak, shortleaf pine habitat on southern exposures and that, southern Blue Ridge here. That really sets us back because those mesophytic species like maple and sweet gum, poplar really like those conditions after we get an intense fire, a very high severity fire. So, oh yeah, I already hit on resistance and containment. And that's just like the ability and the cost. I mean, to put the fire out and to cut in there, you actually got to expose it and put a lot of water in there, which during drought situations, a lot of times we don't have the water to put in it. Wait a minute. I went the wrong way, didn't I? Yep. Okay. Fire duration, holdover potential. Yep. I hit on that already as far as the um, potential for prescribed burns for any wildfire to remain dormant underneath the surface, no smoke's visible for weeks, and then they pop back up. A lot of that has to do with some of the, if the duff and organic soil horizon's deep enough, is those heavies that are in there, say tree limbs from longleaf pine or from pinus species with a lot of resin in them. They'll hold heat in there for a really long time. Roots from dead trees, especially dead pine trees, that get involved with some fire and burning, it can rain a foot on top of those things and they'll pop back. We had a fire in Okefenokee. It burned for 13 months and it was still burning, but we had to call it out because we were going into the next fire season and for staffing and availability. But yeah, I was still putting smoke up for 13 months. So, and I can see that probably happening more often if we get in these severe rainfall deficits. So, again, monitoring, being able to monitor and understand where we're at with those organic soils is going to be really important. And then line construction challenges, touched on that a little bit as far as our ability to, depending on how dry the soil is, I've run into this actually in New Mexico and a couple other places where we got down to mineral soil, but a lot of those subsurface roots, especially in areas that had burnt before, were lower. And a lot of that vegetation was dead. Yes. What? Nope. Okay. Anyway, and those roots becoming engaged in the fire and then burning underneath the fire line that we put in. But it took about 2 weeks. So that was definitely a result of the soil moisture and the situation that we had there, but it's also compounded with the amount of dead organics, woody material underneath the soil that was in the soil horizon. And then we talked about the wet soils inhibiting production, smoke and air quality. So obviously, as more fuel is available, especially organics, you can have up to 100 tons per acre of organic soil in an area that under prescribed fire conditions, you would have 3 tons per acre available. And a lot of times that's some of that trade-off with prescribed fires. We're affecting that top fine fuel layer that's going to be the initial receptor for an ignition to start. But we're not addressing the bigger problem a lot of times because those fuels aren't available because of soil moisture and recent precip events. So it's just definitely something that we keep in mind, and we know that those fuels are available, or they're there, but they're not available. So with our smoke modeling, we model like with using high split or some of these other programs, you can put in there how many tons available fuel there's going to be burnt that day. When those organic soils are available and you crank it up, you're sending smoke plumes, kind of like the Canadian fires that we had and the smoke that was coming down into the United States, or I'm sure wherever you're from in the U.S. recently, in the most recent years, you've had some smoke issues, whether it's from our neighbors or from us. But that's what you're getting. A lot of that Canadian smoke, because I was up there on those in 23, and they a lot of that was the organic soil, that muskeg, peat boral sort layer that's on top of the frozen soils up there and higher elevations and stuff like that. That's what that smoke was. And we had a lot of crown fire, black spruce and balsam fir and stuff like that going. But Most of that was the dirt burn, the organic soil layer burning. So, um, yeah, that's definitely a huge issue with soil moistures, organic soil moistures anyway. Um, okay, yeah, we talked about some of the siltation issues when we have hydrophobic soils because we had high intensity fire running over. Runoff and siltation is a huge issue. Um, this is a really good one that we've been talking about for years. So we had some pretty good fire seasons in '98 in Florida, but then in like say 2004, we had a lot of tree mortality. Well, if you go from '98 through 2000, we had another extreme drought in 2000s. In between there, we got a lot of rain, had some really good tropical events. Everything is reset, but the long-term stress on the trees, the fire practitioners and foresters are going, man, these trees are not looking right. They're not responding. Their vigor is off from where it used to be. And some of those greenness factor analysis that we were starting to get from satellite imagery was really starting to tie into validating our assumptions that the trees now can't uh, yeah, they're more susceptible to damage or mortality from fire is what we were seeing. And it was almost secondary because we got a lot more beetle activity because of the increased stress than we typically would have that we had seen in the past. But there wasn't a lot of data to kind of back us up on what we were seeing. And I'm seeing that now in coastal North Carolina, a lot of places where, especially in pine plantations that have been subjected to a lot of these micro droughts and then flooding and then micro drought again. It seems like it's taken longer for them to recover. There's a lot more damage at the root collar, it seems like too now, as it is than we've seen in the past. And there is literature out there on this and stuff, but there's not a lot of standardized application for the operational folks to apply that literature and the information that's out there right now to, I don't know, mitigating it or at least addressing it and knowing that we can expect this much higher mortality. I don't think our fire models are projecting that as well as they used to, as far as projected mortality in a stand under conditions. Oh yeah, and then when we burn organic soils, there goes our carbon bank that a lot of folks are banking on. TNC is investing heavily in organic soil retention and things like that as a carbon offset. But it's a lot of that's getting released in some of these fires. So there's something to keep in mind. There's just a pretty simple diagram I stole from the internet talking about. So if one of y'all made this, thank you. I really like it. But it's just simple illustration, kind of what I've been talking about, especially when we lose that whole organic layer, and we're down to the dirt. Man, it makes it tough to restore that area and to keep whatever soil we got left in there for recovery. All right, so decision making, some folks are using. I wish I would have threw some slides in here too. The North Carolina Forest Service, Jamie Dunbar, he's their fire environment specialist. He puts together a weekly fire danger synopsis for the state of North Carolina, and he really incorporates a lot of the new products in there for the fire practitioners and for folks to look at. If you haven't seen it, it's a really great tool for us to look at every Monday and say, okay, this is where we're going to be at for the week, according to his estimations. But he's incorporated a lot of the um, greenness, vegetation change analysis type stuff in there, the satellite remote sense, soil moisture condition sense, or I guess reporting. It's not, we don't have a network of soil moisture data probes in the state there to help us get that on-site data and things, but he uses a lot of the remote sense things. So if you get a look, I can give you a link to that. But it's a really great product, and it uses a lot of the work that y'all put in there, and a lot of the research to help us inform our decisions. All right, so prescribed fire. Yep, I think I already hit on that a lot. How we consider those fuel moistures. Awesome. Yep. So the Rocky Mountain Research Station did some really great work. Zach Holden and folks last year doing some utilizing machine learning to, along with a lot of the soil moisture remote sense data to help them dial in on-site fire danger indices across the country. And that's some really strong work that they were doing in that. And so there's a lot of research going on right now. So a lot of this, I'm sure y'all understand, especially coming from an agricultural background, but the foundational, soil moisture is foundational to how the availability of the fuels. I guess I'll put it that way from the fuels context. And then subsequent fire potential and effects. Smoke, yep. Operational planning. Yeah. So my bottom line is we need to keep moving forward on integrating the amount of information that's out there, how it's compiled, and how it's delivered to the fire practitioners and the fire planners out there. If there's some way we can standardize some of this, or at least the conceptual parts of this, because we don't, in our basic fire training or a lot of that, we don't talk about soil moisture at all. It's not a thing. We're fighting fire. There's fire, we're fighting it based on current and expected conditions. But soil moistures don't play a lot into that as far as the on the ground operations go. So I think I could stop there. Yeah. So I'm just going to take it from there. And yeah, any questions? Look, that last one. There we go.
Yeah, we'll start in the room.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Hey.
Jessica. Great presentation. So I work for Cal Fire.
Oh, right on.
And I'm working right now on getting soil moisture sensors installed out all over our stations.
Okay.
I'm trying to analyze data. I guess my biggest question is, how do I get this information to the on the ground? What's the best way to deliver it?
Okay, great.
Makes sense.
No, great question. And I was working on, that was like one of my projects for the Southeast region of the United States, right before I left Forest Service, was installing sensors on all the RAW stations, all the fire RAWs, and we had 88 of them in the Southeast. So that's a big footprint for only 88 stations, right? But it would have been something. And so working with FTS, the company that creates the if you're using the sensors that are compatible with the RAWs, which I think are the Simpson, I don't know which sensors are it.
The Stevens.
Oh.
Which are the SDI, they're connected.
Okay. And you've got the cables that tie it into the data logger. Okay, so then you got to do, my plan was to incorporate that data into when you go in and download the data file for that station in Fire Family Plus or wherever you're getting it from in FIMS, that data will show up as extra columns just in your regular daily observations or your hourly observations. And then where you go with that Then we get into the soil type. Where's it at? Is it an engineered soil type? A lot of them are where our raw stations are. It was a farm. It was it was been disturbed. A bulldozer has been through there. That's why it's flat, unless it's up on some of those rockier tops or remote locations. But then just starting the initial analysis, like we would to get energy release component or something, using Fire Family Plus is where I was going to start, because then we can compare it to all our other indices that we consider and just see if we get a line that looks good, for that location. That would be a problem too, is it's almost site specific. So to do a regional analysis, you could blend them a little bit, or you could at least say at this location, this is this is how it correlates to large fire growth, fire initiation, things like that. Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm gonna pass to online next. Do we have anything, Mike?
So I'm gonna paraphrase a question from Amanda. What is your experience with, if you have a dry column of duff and soil moisture, soil surface, like mineral,
Yep.
and then it rains some amount, an inch of rain, is that making it through the duff? If it's like, can you discuss how the water moves through that duff layer to the mineral soils? Is there some absorption, the first inch of rain gets absorbed by duff and it never makes it to the mineral soil?
That depends, right? I learned that from y'all. No, and so if you're already in extreme drought, and you get that 1 inch of rain, kind of depends on the duration, how fast you got the 1 inch of rain, and how deep the duff is. But a lot of times, no. That's going to give you a reset, especially if you don't get rain for another 10 days or so. You're going to get some relief, because just from the moisture in the air, you're going to get that very top layer of duff, probably a real nice treatment there, unless it's under a dense canopy. Or if it's under, so for some of the firs and things like that, you can get an inch of rain and it'll still be dry as a bone underneath those things, because they shed the water. Same thing up here with some of the canopies we have, even with longleaf. You can get an inch of rain and you only, in general, like outside of the tree canopy and under the canopy, it'll be a quarter, just because they're that good at it. And so it's really going to affect, but the long-term infiltration of water through that duff layer to make it unavailable all the way down to mineral soil, really is going to depend on the depth of the duff, how exposed it is, and how the duration of the rain event. So yeah, the longer the duration, the better. That way, because you've got the duff's really in the litter layer also pull in a lot of moisture just from the air, that very top layer from what I've seen. But yeah, I get an inch of rain operationally, and it's like, okay, great, get the cameras out now, because now we can find a lot of those embedded heat signatures, those IR cameras, use some UAS or even FLIR from helicopters and fly a fire. That's a really good time to find your deep embedded heat, is right after an inch of rain or so on a fire. Hopefully that helps. Yeah.
Go over here first.
You mentioned hydrophobicity, and I think that's kind of a naturally in the forest, but have you noticed any differences, or how do you deal when you have broadleaf versus pine, longleaf ones? Is there a difference in terms of how that hydrophobicity affects the moisture movement down profile? And the texture of the soil too. Is there an interaction there?
I would imagine so I don't know, because for one thing, we don't measure the soil moisture like on a fire. So to answer the question as far as how does it affect the soil, the moisture penetration, great question. As far as what we've done on wildfires, when we look at, like, I go out as a fire behavior analyst, and when we're evaluating an area to get a report ready for the burned area emergency stabilization folks, the bear teams, they're the ones that have to deal with the hydrophobic soils and figure out how they're going to seed it, how they're going to, if they need to put in water bars or try to do some hay baling and stuff like that on steep slopes. So they're probably I'm not even sure if they do that. But they base it on what we report, and we just use this like the good old fashioned water dropper and a timer. Yes, and just look at that, and then we put that in our report, what the times are in different locations on the fire from severity. And then they evaluate, okay, hopefully, I mean, I would think that they're going in there and evaluating the soil types, the soil structures, but I'm not sure. Maybe somebody in here knows what that might look like in different soil types as far as the, um, how it affects that. But I know up here in the you ask about like hardwoods, between hardwoods and pine areas, and then we got slope and things like that to consider. But we have noticed, and it's been documented, and there's some papers out there on some good papers on that change in the mycorrhizal because of that change in soil absorption rates and things like that, plus the fact that the lignin and everything has kind of changed the complexity of the soil at those levels. So, and I think intensity would have some to do with that. And Southern Research Station and Rocky Mountain Research Station have done some good work over the years in thermocouples through the horizon, looking at heat absorption of the soil. And some of those, and I know some of that work's been used to identify those changes in at least the top 16 centimeters or so of soil, because you typically wildfire heat, even really intense wildfire heat, doesn't get far into the soil horizon. It's that long duration, and what is it, over? Is it 1,000? Man, I just ran across this the other day. That number, the temperature of the temperature and the duration of the heat, like burning in organic soils or just in slash fuels, like in a logging operation or a hurricane blowdown. That longer duration residence time of the fire on a particular site, on a particular soil type, definitely has different characters. 'Cause in Florida, it's a kind of a different animal than it would probably be up here as far as soil type changes and things like that, the clay composition and all that, where that clay horizon is. And so anyway, sorry I couldn't get there, but that's a great question. Yeah.
Do we have any more online? Okay,
All right, cool.
all right. More questions in room? I'm gonna go back here next.
Yeah, so there's so much review to be up there. So there still seems to be in a lot of the fire community this strong focus on fuel moisture and KBI. It's still some older.
Yes.
That. How do we get that broader adoption within the fire community with the importance of soil moisture and BED? How do we get to that?
Incorporating it in we were doing it I was doing it this week. On Monday, I'm helping teach a S390 course, like a couple mountains over there. But that's one way we can do it from that level, is in the indoctrination, the initial training and stuff, especially when we're getting into fire effects, fire behavior calculations, things like that, plugging that in there and making it a thing, and really emphasizing on it, having it available on our daily weather forecast or something like that, that when it comes out, there it is. Utilizing that number will mean something then. But then I remember when ERG came, or ERG came out, ERCG, So energy release component using fuel model G. So there wasn't a fuel model G. They made it to fit energy release component, and that's just a calculated fire potential rating based on some parameters. And folks, before when it came out, we were like, that number doesn't mean anything. I can't measure that number. I'm not going to use it. But it did correlate really well. The math did with fire initiation, large fire growth, resistance containment, all those things that we are worried about. But then you got to believe it. So you gotta incorporate it into the training early and often, and then incorporate it into the daily fire indices. And I think that would go a long way to helping people. Yeah.
We do have time for another question.
Really fascinated to hear about your experience in Florida, looking at the long-term effects of drought, past the drought season into, wet years and still seeing that increased mortality.
Yeah.
Is there ways that we can quantify that in terms of, do you have data sets that look at like tree susceptibility to disease or whatever it may be? I'm just wondering, like, that seems like a very relevant perspective, especially as we're seeing some of these, larger droughts. And then, I'm working with our forestry commission in Alabama, and I hear a lot of anecdotal stuff like that. And I'm like, how can we get actual data to correlate that to some of our larger droughts? And as things are changing, do you have any perspective on that?
If I was going to dig into that one right off, I'd probably try to do a historical analysis of the some of the infrared or near infrared greenness change analysis that we can use. There's a lot of products out there that we can do now. Do we have the historical information at the density or the scale that you would need to really extrapolate some good information from that? I don't know, but you could probably tie it in with forest health measurements that they take out there as far as beetle infestation, other tree diseases that are more, and just look at those trends, trying to tie those together, because a lot of the forest health professionals out there, they do go out there and they monitor and they track where we have Ips beetles, where we have southern pine beetles, where we have red heart coming out, in different stands. Why is that happening? And so I think there is information. It's getting the disciplines to work together. So somebody would have to be an interdisciplinary approach type thing to evaluate. But I think the change in greenness stuff, or some of that vegetation departure analysis data that's out there might be a good place to start spatially. And it depends on the scale you're looking at too, like to do the whole state of Alabama. Yeah, I still think you can dial some good stuff in from looking at it, because you got some beetles now, don't you? Yeah. Yeah, that when we saw that and we saw it coming, that's an interesting thing too. It's like a lot of folks say, man, this is going to get bad. And then a couple of years later, it's bad. And it's like, oh, what's going on? Or it seems like we're very reactive kind of operations. And or when it's happening, we don't know what to do about it. That might be another thing to consider too, if you are going to dive into that, is coming up with strategies. So we're identifying these points are moving towards this trend that we've seen before when we had catastrophic loss of industrial pine or something like that, and saying, well, what can we do now to help mitigate that in the future? And a lot of that ties into markets, and I ain't getting into timber markets, but that might be something to consider with some of the work that you might be working on there. But yeah, hopefully that got you there.
Question. There's time if one last question. Okay, well, let's have one more round of applause, please. That was a really great transition that I think brings together a lot of different points we've been talking about. Aside from giving us all a much better perspective for those of us who don't work in fire management into what that looks like and what your thought process is, that was very helpful. I think it ties into what we talked about at the side meeting on Monday in terms of how do you communicate data in a way that's effective for a specific audience. So thanks for giving us insight into one type of audience. And I think it also ties into a bigger theme that's recurrent throughout both of these main plenary days, which is where is modeled or remote sense data valuable and where does it need to be paired with in situ and vice versa. So thank you for bringing all those themes together and giving us day in the life of, or multiple years in the life of fire management.